We're going to give our attention now to Brother Martin Harbeck. He's going to give us a history of the Anderson congregation, and he'll have a little help while he does it.
Well, as I look out on the audience, I see a little bit of white hair and gray hair, a number of older ones here, including myself. You know, Jehovah gave us a commission, you older ones. Open your Bibles to Psalm 71 and notice verse 18. Psalm 71 and verse 18. He said, "Even when I am old and gray, O God, do not abandon me." Now notice, let me tell the next generation about your power and about your mightiness to all those who are to come. So you see, we older ones have the responsibility of passing on to the next generation, not only what we read in the scriptures, but even our personal experiences and how Jehovah has helped us and how Jehovah has really spurred the growth of the Christian congregation. It was interesting, in a 1992 Watchtower, there was an article on the need to preserve and document our spiritual heritage. And a member of the governing body was quoted as saying this: "To know where we are going, we have to know where we have come from." Isn't that a nice sentiment? So again, around the world, older ones have a rich spiritual heritage, and that's the truth here in Anderson as well. The beginning of this in Anderson was probably around 1909 or 1910. Marion Morris was his name. He was reading publications by Charles Taze Russell, and he stood up in his church and announced, "I'm leaving," because he couldn't agree with the teachings of that church. Well, not long after that, Marion Morris moved to Florida and he established a produce company, but he began writing his cousins back in Anderson. He wrote one cousin, James Rush, and first they weren't real receptive. In fact, I was looking at one of his letters from 1911. He said, "I know you think that I've been misled. I've been led astray." In fact, in that same letter, he says, "You may have thought that I'm crazy and unbalanced." But he continued to write. But soon some of those cousins did begin to respond, including Ruth Rush Babb, Zessie Rush Marchbanks, and her husband, Elkanah. Elkanah Marchbanks was a prominent businessman. He had a jewelry store downtown in Anderson. And as he got the truth, he started displaying the literature right in the front window of his jewelry store. The family then began meeting on his house on the boulevard. And later, when he moved to Marchbanks Avenue, he had a small laundry house behind the house. And for many years, that's where the congregation met. In time, others joined the group. For example, there was a Greek couple, Nick and Angie Karras. Many of you remember her. And they got the truth in Atlanta, and then they moved to Anderson. Then in the late 30s, Mellie Brooks, and we know a lot of the Brooks family, don't we? Her large family began associating with the group. Sometime in the 1930s, there was a brother who came through and was surprised that there was a group here and didn't think that the branch knew anything about them. So he encouraged them to contact the branch, and then eventually a congregation was formed, the Anderson Center Unit. Now, it should be realized that during those early years in the South was very segregated. But interest was developing in the Black community as well. And eventually a Black congregation was formed and named the South Congregation in 1945. But the congregations wouldn't be fully integrated till 1972. But let's get a little more of this history as we talk to the three sisters here. First of all, we're going to talk to Sister Harbeck. Babb, I know you weren't here in 1930, but your grandmother was, and she was one of the first members of the congregation. Tell me about your grandmother.
Well, in 1918, my grandfather died in June during the Spanish flu epidemic. And my grandmother was very distraught because she had 3 small children that she had to take care of. And Marion Morris, he comes up a lot, Marion Morris wrote her a letter of encouragement and shared scriptures with her. And I think he gave her some literature too. And she read that. She shared that with her sister, Zessie Marchbanks, and Zessie's husband, Elkanah. And they became the first witnesses, all 3 of them, in Anderson.
Very good. Now, what about your mother, though?
Well, she was a 9-year-old when Mama started reading the literature, and so I don't think she had much opinion one way or the other then. But when she became a teenager, things changed. She was very embarrassed by my grandmother's door-to-door ministry. And she wanted to know why my grandmother had to sell those books from door to door.
Now, there was something we call the sound car incident.
Yes. Now, she lived on Boulevard, as did the Marchbankses. And there was a brother who drove a sound car, and he was determined to visit Anderson, and one of his favorite routes was down the boulevard. And of course, he played Brother Rutherford's records loud so that everyone could hear it. And he would drive down the boulevard, and then he'd make the turn in front of the Marchbanks home and park in their driveway and continue playing the records.
What'd your mother think about that?
She was horrified.
Yes. In fact, I have a picture number 1, which is a picture of the Marchbanks home there on the boulevard, which where some of the first meetings were held. That building's still there, but the brick is painted white now, but it's right there still on the boulevard. Well, now, obviously, your mother did accept the truth.
Oh, yes. She started investigating for herself as she got older. And she was convinced that this was the truth. So once she was convinced, then she became a very faithful witness. She was bold and a very determined person.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then what did she, among others, encourage the group to do? And
okay. She wanted to be baptized in 1935. And she thought the rest of the group that was active should be too. So she encouraged them to be baptized. Mm-hmm. And by then, the Marchbanks home was on Marchbanks Avenue. And so they were baptized in April of 1935 in the Lily Pond at Marchbanks home. Mm-hmm. And by then, the family was having Sunday dinner with all together, and afterwards they would have the Watchtower study.
Yes, I have a picture of the family, picture number 2, showing them hosing after a Watchtower study. And I tried to count, and I think there's at least 6 or 7 who then, this was probably 31, 6 or 7 who were later baptized in that lily pond. One more question, Babb. Your mother had an interesting experience in street work. Tell us about that.
Yes, she was doing street work in Anderson, and a black lady approached her, and she had been reading the publications. Her name was Lula Rice, and she asked my mother, "Why has no one been to see me?" And mother said, "Well, I'll come." And so she did, and she started a study with Lula and her daughter, Sylvine. And Sylvine's here today.
Yes.
So that's it.
That's-
But she did say this, that Lula knew much more about the truth than she did, but she studied with her.
So now Lula Rice was one of the first members of the Black congregation. Now Sister Dennis, she remembers some of that. Tell us a little bit about that early days there.
First, I'd like to tell you that the congregation, as you had mentioned, in 1945, it was established. And of course, at this time, we were meeting at Sister Lula Rice's house. It was mainly sisters. In fact, it was Sylvine, Lula, and a sister named Nellie Sherrod. So they would meet there at the meeting, and Lula became the company servant. She was a company servant, and Sylvine was took care of the accounts. And Nellie, I understand, she handled the territories. And of course, at that time, we were working all the Blacks, no matter where they lived.
Yes. Tell us about some of the places you met as that congregation.
Well, we were meeting at after Lula's house. Then we had a room that was on Church Street. But let me tell you a little bit about Church Street. It was the Black district there, and they had everything on that in that little block, from doctor's offices even to the funeral homes. And they allowed them to have a room where the doctor offices were, and they had to be upstairs. I remember going up those stairs to that meeting room. But the thing about it, it cost $10 a month. And sometimes I was told, I was quite a little girl then, that they didn't have quite enough money to pay that $10. So Brother Rankins, your dad, would help them pay, and then Brother Nick Karras, they would pitch in and help them pay that rent.
Mm-hmm. Now there were some other places you met as well.
Yes, we did. We went to from Sister Lula Rice's house. Then we went down on to Sherrod's sister house. We had to go there because the kind of conditions were a little bad there, so they kind of moved around. We went to another sister's home at one time, and finally ended up at an old school. It was on South Fannie Street School. It was closed, so they rented us one room, and it was a huge room with high ceilings, and it was the brothers had to get there early to make a fire for us, and it was so cold in the winter. And equally as hot in the summertime too. However, we stayed there for a while, and later on we were able to get a storefront building in order to have our meetings there. But can I tell you a little something about Sister Rice?
Sure.
I often listened to her tell about how she came to the truth, Sister Lula. Well, she said that she had gotten the truth in the early 20s. In fact, before Sylvine was born. And that she had, her husband came home one day, says, "There's a man down there at the church, and he's preaching the Bible. I want you to go along with me." So she was convinced to go with him. She went down there, and she said she found that truth that very day. She said that man had a book, and the name of it was The Divine Plan of the Ages. Found out later that was a book that was written by Brother C.T. Russell. So she said that from that book, it just captured her heart. With that in the Bible, she knew she had the truth.
Tell us about now your Kingdom Hall over there on Geesburg.
Well, the Kingdom Hall on Geesburg, after they had grown, we had gotten some brothers, and it was wonderful having brothers now to take the lead for us. There was one brother that came in named Samuel Brown. He was the pioneer that had been sent in along with my uncles. They were the Joneses and Walter James. Some people might remember him. They were all there. So we had saved a little money, and we were able to purchase this building. And Brother Samuel knew a brother that was in Athens, Georgia, that did construction work. So he agreed to come and help us out. If you had a crowbar, you could help out because we had to renovate the building. If you had a hammer, a nail, and a paintbrush, if you could handle those things, didn't have LDC, you could be able to work on it. Everybody volunteered.
Very. In fact, I have a picture not of the building, but at the this is picture number 3 at the dedication. I believe you told me of that picture, and in that picture you see Brother and Sister Karis, and there you see Sister Lula Rice and Sylvine. So that was nice. Okay, Sister Brooks. Tell us how you came to be in Anderson. You weren't born here.
No, I came in 1952. I married the 5th son of Millie Brooks, and there were still 6 or 7 other children still at home, some baptized, some not. But she was very active in the congregation. My husband and I came as newlyweds. He was only 19, and he was appointed school overseer.
Yes.
So that was, and the congregation was only like 45, and that included Anderson County and Oconee County. So, some of the sisters, Sister Karis, and sometimes Louise, and some of the others would ride to Seneca on the Greyhound bus because there was no public transportation. Stay all day, catch the bus on its way back to Anderson, and that was the form of covering the territory.
Very good. You know, you mentioned, and Sister Harbeck mentioned, Sister Dennis mentioned sisters being used. Back then, this was before the elder arrangement. Back then, quite often, sisters were appointed not as an elder, but to specific assignments. I found one circuit overseer's report. Like you mentioned, Melly, she was the assistant company servant. Your husband, 19, as you said, the school servant. Your sister-in-law had territories. Margaret Marchbanks had Bible studies. Louise Rankin, Babb's mother, was accounts. And Babb's sister, Martha, was something called an advertising servant. I'm not too sure what that
I
is.
think that was the magazines.
Yes. So, Marsha, where did you meet?
My husband and I met in 1950 in New York at the International Convention there. I was from Missouri. I had been baptized in 1941 at that famous Children's of the Kingdom convention in St. Louis, Missouri. And we didn't know each other. He came from South Carolina, I came from Missouri, and we met in 1950.
Been here ever since, haven't you? Well, as far as the Kingdom Hall, where did you meet?
We were meeting upstairs over, first, when I got here, we were meeting upstairs over the Acme grocery store.
Bring up picture number 4 for us. And in fact, the person there on the right is Sister Brooks in that picture.
Perhaps.
But now, even before that, where did you meet?
Oh, that was over the greasy spoon, aptly named, aptly named.
Right. So we thank you, sisters, for your fine experiences.
I think we could have-
Now to continue forward, just a few key dates in the history. As mentioned, the Anderson Center unit, as it was called then, met in a laundry room. In 1945, as the Sister Dennis pointed out, they met, the Black congregation was formed. Then Brother Joe Marchbanks donated the land that we're actually sitting on right now for the original Kingdom Hall on this site. We have a picture of Pioneer School out in front of the Kingdom Hall. This was in 1980, but that's how the first Kingdom Hall here met. When I looked at that picture, there's a number of you that are in that picture, by the way. Again, as we said, in 63, that house was remodeled on Giesberg Drive. And then in 72 was a momentous year. It was the year that the elder arrangement began, but it was also the year that the congregations were at last integrated. the hall on Giesberg was sold, and the two congregations, the two integrated congregations, now met here. 1984, there was growth, so an East congregation was formed. Then in 1995, this old Kingdom Hall here was torn down, and there was an RBC project to build the building we're in now. Again, those were the 3-day projects. It was a rough weekend in the fall, and we had a little rain, we had a little snow. Always tell the story, when we tore down that hall, I came by in the morning and got a brick as a souvenir. And when I got to work, there were two of my workmates in my office and said, "What happened to your church?" If I was smart, I would have pled ignorance, but Now, in the 2000s, there was a new demographic here. More and more in our ministry, we were meeting Spanish speakers. So Spanish congregations were being formed. There was a congregation in Walhalla, and then there was a group formed here in Anderson, a Spanish group that worked under the Walhalla congregation. They would have their midweek meetings in Walhalla, and they'd have a Sunday meeting here. And then around 2006, the Spanish congregation here was formed. And then in 2013, expansion, we now had another English congregation, the West. So there's been a grand expansion from the 30s, where there was less than probably 30 publishers. Even in 52, there was 50 publishers in the white congregation and less than 40 in the black congregation. But what about today? Well, now we have 5 congregations in Anderson. We have 575 publishers. Our memorial attendance last year for the congregations was 930. So indeed, Jehovah's promise that the little one will become 1,000 has been at work here in Anderson as well. So we pray that with Jehovah's help and the hard work of 575 publishers, we'll continue to see growth here in Anderson.
Well, thank you, Brother Harbeck. Thank you, sisters, too. Nice to see the spiritual heritage we've had in this area for so long.